Ah, okay. Hi, this is Greg Muna, aka Master Moo, and we're having another edition of, we're calling it Moo Live for now, but you know, maybe we can think of it as Music is a Revelation. That's an alternate title. I'm not sure whether to go with that. And I wrote a song called Music is a Revelation, and the lyrics were Music is a revelation of God and sound. And that's a very out there thing to say, but I believe it. And it has nothing to do with whether or not you're religious. I'm not really a religious person. I don't have any traditional belief in God or anything like that. But I think if I say music is a revelation of God and sound, we're taking God to mean the totality of cosmic information, of all the information that exists in the entire universe, and how that information is interconnected. And we know that information is interconnected because we, as human beings, are able to relate to it. We have sense perceptions. We're able to see, smell, taste, touch. Hear. We're able to interact with our universe, with what's around us. And we're able to think about it. And we're able to think about our sense perceptions in time. We're able to remember the past and forecast the future in the present. And this makes us self aware. The ability to think about, to reason, to have emotions, to have psychological reactions, to have physical reactions to our sense perceptions as they come in. And as a musician and as a composer, the sense perception that I'm interested in is the sense perception of sound. So I'm devoted to getting into a deeper understanding of what sound is and what it means for us as human beings who are able to think about sound and have emotional responses to sound, psychological responses to sound, subconscious, unconscious. Sound provokes every level of response, from intellectual to emotional to subconscious to erotic, aggressive, trance oriented. All of those are ways in which we respond to hearing, which is very different from, say, the way other living creatures. I mean, most living creatures have some sound ability to hear, but we human beings uniquely have the ability to reflect upon what we hear and to remember what we've heard and to imagine sound in the future. This is unique to us. And as far as we know, we may be the only evolved creatures in the universe who have this ability. You know, we've never been contacted by intelligent aliens or other species. They're probably out there, but we have no way of knowing if they exist because they've never contacted us and we've never been able to identify them. I mean, we've been spending zillions of dollars and, for decades scanning the heavens looking for something out there that would indicate, organized, self aware life. And we've found amazing, amazing phenomena throughout the universe, but we've found zero evidence that anyone besides us is actually out there looking for that. So not only have we not been directly contacted, we haven't found any evidence that there might be something out there even beyond the range of what's contact. So we have to accept the awesome truth that we may be the only self-aware evolved organisms in the universe. That's really something. and that if that's true, that gives us a unique responsibility to cultivate and maintain our self-awareness. It means that we have an ethical responsibility as individuals to do everything that we can to promote, maintain, and expand and propagate self-awareness. And the main way that we experience our self-awareness is through our sense perceptions. And on this series of what we're talking about is self-awareness through sound. And this is what I try to work with as a composer, and this is what I try to experience as a listener. And this is what, I don't know if I succeed, but this is what this is my objective. This is what I'm trying to achieve as a composer. And this is what I would like you to experience as a listener. Now, what I was saying about the existence of self-aware matter, which is what we are, the fact that we exist, and that we are matter, and that we have the potential of self-examination, self-reflection, means that it is possible, because it is possible for us to exist, because we exist, because our senses exist. It is possible for matter. It means that matter, physical matter, which is what we are, has the potential of organizing in a way that leads to self-awareness. That self-awareness, which is being able to react to information outside itself, is a potential attribute of matter, because we exist. So the fact that we exist, the fact that we have sense perceptions, means that self-awareness is real and does exist. And since we are real, we can then use theistic language like God, because we can put it as a label for the sort of the cosmic expansion of what is us in a microcosm of self-aware matter. Because we are self-aware matter, the quality of self-awareness may exist throughout the entire universe. And we only have access to our limited information, the information which is in our physical bodies. My physical body, from head to toe, from right to left, has, I don't know how many atoms or whatever like that. So there's a limited, a very large but limited amount of information that is me, and that I can interact with in terms of sound waves or light waves and so on in various sense perceptions. But the totality of information throughout the entire universe, of all atoms, all photons, all subatomic particles, all interacting, and it's been established scientifically that there is non-locality. Again, I'm not a physicist, but this is sort of basic stuff. The Einstein-Podolsky-Rosen postulate. It has been established that non-locality, that is to say, the interaction of information over cosmically long distances, has been proven to exist. Which means, what does that mean? That non-local, Einstein himself was skeptic. He said, he called it spooky action at a distance, and he couldn't believe. But in fact, recent experiments in the Large Hadron Collider and the various have shown that one particle in one part of the universe is able to affect the information of another particle that is separated, which means that this type of interactivity, which is the same thing as a sense perception, which is one waveform interacting with another waveform and setting up a chain reaction, which in our case is through our nervous system and through our brains and through our hearing, I mean, we understand, of course, how hearing works, which is that there are vibrations of sound vibrations which are communicated through a physical medium of air, but also sound propagates through water, and so on. Of course, that's how fish and aquatic mammals communicate. I mean, sound requires a physical medium as opposed to light, which is able to propagate through empty space, enters through our ears, and then the air vibrations in our outer, middle, and inner ear are translated into electrical pulsations in our auditory neurons, which then, in our brain, which then creates a model of the sound. So what we hear as sound is a recreated electrical model, a neurological model of actual variations in air pressure created by specific frequencies in sound. In that sense, we don't hear the sound directly. What we experience as sound is essentially a kind of a digital recreation inside of our brain of the physical. You might say that's, again, this is an analogy, that sound is kind of analog, and kind of hearing, what we hear is kind of a digital representation of that, if you can accept that analogy, right? And so what is it that makes hearing interesting? And evolutionary psychologists don't have a definitive answer. I mean, according, if we read Darwin, there's very good reason to believe that our sense of hearing, not only is evolved, again, basic neo-Darwinian, this is like Darwin for dummies because I'm a dummy, is that basically every characteristic that we've evolved is connected to survival selection, number one, and secondarily sexual selection, courtship selection. So in other words, the ability to survive, and then the ability to successfully mate or reproduce. So the standard Darwinian explanation is that we have these two levels of evolutionary pressure have led to our ability to hear and to produce sound and to communicate both productively and receptively with the phenomenon of sounds. And which is that living creatures who have hearing also have the ability to produce sound. So both, right? And so according to sort of the standard, and again, I'm not a scientist, so this is very like, Darwin for dummies. We have evolved abilities to produce and listen to sound, because it helps us to survive. And that survival advantage should be obvious. We can hear, those of us who have normal sense perceptions are able to hear our things that are happening in our environment as a sense of awareness, of warning. If there's a predator approaching, or if there is an avalanche or a danger, if there's so we are instinctively averse to loud, violent noises, which could be, things like collapsing rocks or whatever, things near us, and so we have built-in responses to sharp, sudden, loud noises. And I'm sure you've seen, if you have pets, the way they freak out when they hear loud, sharp noises. Poor little dogs go nuts when they hear like 4th of July fireworks, because of that instinctive fear of loud, sharp noises. And at the same time, it seems that we have an evolved evolutionary desire to overcome our fear of these things that trigger fear. And so we're simultaneously often attracted to these things which signal danger. I mean, this is the same psychology of taking a roller coaster ride at an amusement park. Like why do we find it enjoyable to experience a roller coaster? Because the experience of falling down to zero gravity it normally could be fatal, right? It would be like falling off a mountain or falling off a cliff. But a roller coaster ride is a controlled way of experiencing that, which is not going to result in injury. So that is a way of actually building confidence, of like conquering over fear, and the ability to handle what we were normally terrified of. That gives us a sense of joy, like a sense of of thrill. That's exciting. So there is thrill seeking in seeking those liminal levels of perception that normally prevent us. And in music, I think, unfortunately, one of the most common ways that we experience that is through noise, decibels, loudness. And so whenever we're at a musical event, whenever the presenter or the musician wants to get a big audience response, to create like a climax, the decibels always go up. And this is true whether it's a DJ in a nightclub, or whether it's a live concert, or studio, whatever, rock, hip hop, folk, any kind of music, and it's also true in so-called art music, that if there's the climax is always the loudest part, and that's not a problem if it's coming from a very low decibel level. I mean, for example, if you're listening to a string quartet playing, say, a Mozart string quartet, the decibel level may start off very, very low, and it may get to a climax, but that climax is still below any sort of dangerous threshold because there's not that much noise content. But you still will notice that even very refined string players, when they arrive at a kind of a loud climax, they tend to increase the pitch to noise ratio. And again, this is slightly technical, but what I mean by pitch to noise ratio is the attack of the sound. So for example, when acoustic musicians really like dig in with the bow of the string, and they make before the pure tone. You've all heard this, the violinist playing loud and really like sawing away, and that gets exciting at a loud. But what's going on besides the increase in amplitude? There's also an increase in the noise to pitch ratio, and so even if the decibel level stays at a safe level, and again, scientists say that in general we should avoid exposing ourselves to anything above like 80 decibels, which is really not very loud, not that much louder than even that I'm speaking right now. I mean, that we should try to keep things at a conversational level, and try not to that if we get exposed to volumes above that, of decibels above that, it could actually cause a hearing damage, like someone screaming in your ear, right? And but we also have a tendency to seek those loud sound experiences out, and because of that roller coaster effect I was saying, that is a way of like, there's the thing that is dangerous, in this case, the possibility of hearing damage, and wanting to go as close as possible to that and to sort of ride that safely, like the roller coaster. But I personally, as I get older, I want to preserve my hearing. My hearing is super important to me, which reminds me I should probably go for like a regular checkup to get out, check earwax and stuff like that. We all should. This is like sort of basic hygiene. Yeah. Um, I have allergies. I tend to sometimes I get you can hear in my voice. Sometimes I have, uh, sometimes my speaking voice is unpleasant because of nasal congestion, and I apologize for that. And sometimes I get also stuffed up ears, and so it's something that I have to pay attention to, and I think we all do. We all want to keep our sense perceptions as, of course, as we get older, our bodies age and our sense perceptions age, and it's true of sight, sound, hearing, smell, all of those things become their physical processes, and, with wear and tear over time, our neurological responses become less acute. Luckily, um, because of the evolution of our brain structures, we have more memory. We have sensory memories, and as we get older, even if our actual sense perception is less acute, we have a greater bank of sense memories that allow us perhaps to fill in the blanks so that we can still function on a pretty high level as long as there's a basic skeleton of perception. But again, that in terms of overall pitch perception, scientists say that the ballpark is 20 hertz to 20,000 hertz, but really, up in the 10,000 to 20,000 hertz range, it's really only very newborn babies that hear very clearly in that level. And toddlers and infants, they love high pitched tinkly sounds. If I play on the piano, if you're playing music for like a toddler, they love stuff like they love tinkly little things like that. Like things that sound like bells and um, you know. I'm not going to play the piano for you, but you know what I mean. And the generally we maintain our ability to hear lower frequencies throughout our whole life, and that also has a lot to do with our physical structure, which is that lower frequencies also transmit well through bone conductivity. So even if we're not hearing like a very clear, the lowest notes of an orchestra, like the lowest pitches of a double bass, like low E going down to low C, the lowest notes of the tuba, the lowest notes of a contrabassoon, like the B natural and the B flat, so the lowest notes of the piano, like the A zero, we don't really hear the fundamentals that clearly. Mostly we hear the overtones. The fundamentals in that range, like in 20 to 30 hertz, sort of, or 20 to 40 hertz. Mostly we experience through bone conductivity, you know, and depending on people, some of us it can be aware of pulsations lower than that, so-called subsonic, and there are woofers that that emphasize subsonic partials and stuff like that. And people have a variety of responses to subsonic sounds. Some people find them pleasing, some people find them upsetting. It depends on where you feel it in your body. Supposedly uh, it could interfere with your digestion, or it depends on where you are. Yeah. So we have evolved limits to what we can hear in terms of low and high frequencies, and the changes over time, and becomes more limited to sort of the center of the spectrum. Generally, the center of the spectrum being pretty much like the range of a standard piano keyboard. The kind of 88 keys of sort of 7.5 octaves. From about approximately 27 hertz to approximately 4,000 hertz or so, 5,000 hertz is sort of standard keyboard range. That is the shared sort of thing that goes on, right? And we also have basic limits in terms of amplitudes, and as I said, in terms of decibel limits. And there is a comfortable decibel maximum of about 80 decibels. You know. So I really try to keep my music soft, and I try to avoid extreme. So and when you're listening to it, keep a full rich sound, but don't crank it painfully. Don't push it to that sort of nightclub level, or like the level where you're in a subway. That's going to be damaging, and that's the opposite of what I want to. My goal, my artistic and my expressive goal. And the other thing that I was talking about was noise to pitch ratio, which big percussive climaxes. Climaxes in music generally have a couple of elements, right? And generally one is usually, not always, because music can have a big slow climax, but usually when things move more quickly, when there's the general sort of global sense of rhythm increases, that's a part of it. When pitch goes up, when the spectrum is fuller, and when the amplitudes go up to that borderline danger level, like above 80 decibels, and usually what gets music over to that level in acoustic music is the presence of percussion. In other words, as I said, I gave the earlier example of a Mozart string quartet. There are no drums. There's no one like smashing, cymbals or drums in that, and so the overall decibel level doesn't go that high. But the sense of climax is usually created by speed and a higher noise to pitch ratio, as well as a generally like higher decibel level. The music that you're hearing in the background right now, my music, it varies, in terms of it starts off at a 0 and so on, right? But unlike the climax of, say, a Mozart string quartet, there is not an increase in that noise to pitch ratio. This is what I was talking about, the noise to pitch ratio. And meaning that I deliberately use sound materials, sine waves, which have basically no elements of white noise, where there's just pitch. What is noise? Noise is a mixture of many indeterminate pitches all happening simultaneously, so that when it hits your ear, you can't hear any one pitch. So when percussion, there are two types of percussion. There's pitched percussion and there's unpitched percussion. And pitched percussion are the ones that sound like regular musical instruments, like bells, like glockenspiel, vibraphone. That's pitched percussion. Then unpitched percussion are things like big bass drums, cymbals, tambourines, and they have a sense of like high and low, but they don't have any specific sense of pitch. There are ones that are in the middle, like, for example, kettle drums in the orchestra, timpani. They do have a fundamental pitch, but when they're played very loud and very fast, they also have a unpitched kind of a very high noise element. So those are a mixture. But generally, percussion is pitched, unpitched, or mixed. Like in the case of timpani. The difference between a timpani sound and a bass drum, I mean, they're basically the same instrument, but when you make a roll on a bass drum, there's no specific pitch. It's just in the low end. It's like a cluster of low pitch frequencies, whereas cymbals, tambourines, those are all higher. They're sort of, if you can think of them in terms of bandpass filters. You can think of like noise and filters going up and down the sonic spectrum. And I was thinking about this nexus of amplitude, noise to pitch ratio, speed, And acoustics, of course, it has to do also whether or not we're in a reverberant space and whether or not there is reverb. And that's another thing which I take off the table in these pieces. There's no reverb. These are just dry sine tones interacting with each other. And so they don't exist in any sort of acoustic space. So when you hear this, it's very disorienting because it's completely different from our normal way of hearing music. We always hear music in an acoustic space. Even if we're listening to headphones, the sound has been adjusted, to create the illusion of an acoustic space. You may not know that as a listener, right? But there's always something that's added, and we call that reverb. One of the things that's added to so-called dry sound or a pure signal is reverb, to create the sense that you're like in a room, whether it's a relatively small room in which someone is speaking, like right now, perhaps a slightly larger room with someone playing a guitar or like a string quartet, or maybe like a huge room, like a concert hall. And those acoustics, then the reverb is bigger. And then the biggest reverb would be, like a cathedral or like a huge stadium or like, echoes and cliffs, like natural gigantic canyon type echoes. Those are echoes. That's beyond reverb, right? And so we enjoy hearing. When we say sound is warm, what we're saying is that we can feel it bouncing back to us in an acoustic space, that there's an acoustic source like a musician, and then the sounds go out. Again, we're talking about airwaves, and then they bounce off of surfaces and then come back to us physically, both in terms of sound that we hear, through airways or ears, and also bone conductivity that we feel throughout our whole bodies. And that's a very wonderful sensation. And I hope everyone has experienced strong, beautiful, enveloping acoustic space in their lives, whether it's in a church or a concert hall. It's a wonderful experience to feel sound completely surrounding your body, entering your ears. It's very different from just listening on headphones like we are right now, feeling the sound all around you. And wherever you are listening to this, I really encourage you to get out there and attend live music and attend to acoustic music, and to really feel music come through physical space and feel it when you are in an acoustic warm live space, like a good well-designed concert hall. Then there's no need for amplification, and just a normal sort of tone, not a very loud, like an below 80 decibel sound. The sound expands through the space, and it reflects and it refracts off of surfaces, and it comes into you. And that's really very intimate. To me, that experience of communication with a musician performing live is different from, but still as intimate as an intimate encounters with family members, friends, loved ones. It's very human. It's very warm. It's very emotional. It's very intimate. In my last session, I talked about these pieces being continuo, and the idea of a background for live performance. So I want to stress that again, is that if you enjoy the way these compositions, the way my compositions sound, and again, these are just snippets here on TikTok, but the complete pieces are on YouTube. Follow the links. These are excerpts of larger compositions, which each one is different, but they range in duration from about 16 minutes to about 22 minutes. So not too long. It's not too much of a time commitment. You can just, I suggest that, first listen to it contemplatively, like we were talking, as a kind of a meditation with the headphones, and find the ones that you like, find the ones that speak to you. Some people are going to be more attracted to the lower frequency ones. Some people will prefer the mid frequencies. Some people will be strongly attracted to the higher frequencies. We were saying how like little little babies, children really love high frequency things more than low frequency things, you know. So that depends on you. That's a totally like personal sense. And it, for me, it varies, you know, like sometimes I'm in the mood for bass, and sometimes I'm in the mood for treble, and sometimes I'm in the mood for, you know, soprano, alto, tenor, you know, different ones, you know. It very much depends on mood, time of day. One of the YouTube comments was one of the commentators was experiencing in one of my pieces an experience of grief. And that was true. I was experiencing an emotion of grief, and I chose pitches that formed a kind of a chord and a kind of a rhythm that for me was tragic and dark, and working through a catharsis of the emotions of grief. So every time I set up on creating a composition, I'm starting with basic materials of pitches, and I'm looking at pitches and rhythms and harmonies and melodies that express whatever emotion I'm in at that moment. And sometimes that's happy, sometimes that's sad, sometimes it's happy and energetic, you know, ranging going towards manic. Sometimes it's really just, you know, negative and slow and very depressive, and all million shades in between. You know, music, because music has tremendous variety within the limits of perceivable sound, and within the limits of perceivable rhythm, and within the limits of perceivable harmonies. And we do have real limits. This is what I was talking about. This is why I was talking about like 20 hertz, 20,000 hertz, or that sort of that kind of safe decibel limit of around 80 decibels, right? And of course, we have physical limitations. There's only so long that we can sit in one place without having to, you know, eat or sleep or you know, take care of bodily functions. And again, that's different from person to person and from moment to moment, right? So these are all sort of limits that are built in. We have other basic hardwired built-in limits of perception. At least I do. I mean, I found from listening to music myself that I'm only able to really process directly a fairly limited number of ratio relationships. I can hear clearly octaves, you know, which is ratios of 2 to 1, you know. In other words, C2 against C1, C3. You know, octaves are perfectly clear, and that's because they have the simplest ratio, which is a power of 2. And that seems to be pretty universal, you know. I mean, 2 to 1, 4 to 2, 4 to 1, powers of 2, that is to say, 2-1 to 2-0, 2-2 to 2 power, you know, powers. Again, this is, I'm not a mathematician. But this is basic stuff, right? That seems to be a fairly universal experience, you know. And I can also hear simple relationships of the 3 to the power of 1, like 3 to 2. That's really easy. That sounds to me like a perfect fifth. And yeah, that's that, and I think that's also universal. I mean, pretty much every music in the world has that. Traditional folk music, Western music, African, Asian, you know, like every continent, music has octaves and has fifths, you know, and those basic 2s and 3s, 1s, 2s and 3s seem to be everywhere, you know. And then as we go beyond 1, 2, 3, you know, as we go further up, our sense of exact ratio gets less and less. I mean, even 3 to 2 is less clear than 2 to 1, you know, right? And of course, the clearest is 1 to 1. 1 to 1, the unison da da is the clearest possible thing. And that's even clearer than the da da octave, 2 to 1, right? Or the da da, the 3 to 2, right? So as we go up, our sense of a certainty of clear interval perception decreases. Yeah, and and that becomes even a big borderline issue when we get to one, two, three, four. Those are powers of one, two, three. We get to even when we get to five. You know, because da da, yeah, major third. All right. Different cultures have different ideas of what that major third is, and not every culture has that major third. Not every culture has those five based harmonies, five against two against three. Those are fundamental to what we call the Western classical art tradition, because those interactions of ratios of five, simple, low, without further multiples, but just five, two, and three, those form the major chord, like the C major chord. Da, 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 right? Again, I'm not going to spend too much time on music theory, but this is like basic perceptual stuff. That major chord is the basic chord of Western music, and it's because of the dissemination of Western and popular music, it's become global. So everywhere you go on planet Earth right now, you can hear major, like a C major chord, and it's become globalized. But it hasn't always been globalized. Not every culture has a clear and unambiguous relationship with those multiples of five. And so our sense of accurate perception decreases as we get older, and it creates more uncertainty in our perceptions in our brain. You know. So that is one thing that I'm working with in these compositions, because these are attempts to create harmonic and rhythmic structures that go beyond that basic sort of like five limit or like seven limit into higher prime numbers. So what I'm investigating, that's why a lot of people hear this and it sounds dissonant, or it sounds, some people hear this, oh, that's horrible, that's noise. So the experimental aspect of this music is, what do these ratios have in common that we can experience more simply, you know, when there isn't just this two, three, five, this sort of the normal major and minor chords. What is the level of simplicity of intuitive perception, right? And this is how I've created this. What I wanted to consider, and what I want to discuss with you, and what I'd like you to share with me in the chat thread comments, is, what is your most recent experience of sound which has been enveloping and totally pleasurable, and like, what has been like your optimal experience of listening? And I was talking about warm acoustic spaces, and the sense of like a big, a full spectral, meaning full spectrum of sound climax. And I just experienced that the other night in Carnegie Hall here in New York. I'm speaking to you from New York City, and I had to wait online to get cheap tickets. It was very arduous. I got to Carnegie Hall at 6 o'clock in the morning, and the box office didn't open until 11. So I waited in the cold for 5 hours to get cheap tickets, less expensive tickets, to hear the Vienna Philharmonic visiting Carnegie Hall under the wonderful veteran Italian maestro Riccardo Muti, and they were performing. There were two symphonies on the program: an early symphony by Schubert, but the big major part of the program was a big symphony number 7 by Anton Bruckner, Austrian composer Anton Bruckner. And you may not be interested in classical music, but if you are in classical music, you know that Bruckner is a major symphonist, and that his symphonies are very big and unfold over, they're pretty much like, tend to be an hour or more in length, and the big movements run sort of right into each other, so it's kind of like a big arc of sound. And his symphonies are different, but they tend to start off very quiet. They tend to start off at a minimal, almost imperceptible dynamic, and then gradually build to a big, one great big climax and then down. So there's generally like a sense of like just a gradual over an hour or more than an hour of a sense of a swelling sound, from a minimal decibel to like maximal, and then, and so on. And so it's all about building that sense of climax before. And I was really noticing how he was doing that in terms of not only change in a rhythm from like slower to faster rhythms, and changing timbral colors, and the sort of manipulation of the sound spectra from like lower pitches to higher pitches. And of course, the decibel level, the decibels getting louder, but also the gradual increase in the noise to pitch ratio level. How in the beginning you were just basically hearing very sort of pure frequencies on like, very simple string or woodwind, like sounds and stuff like that, and and then how gradually the noise level would increase. And that was and the biggest climax of this music of Bruckner's Seventh Symphony is in the high point of the big slow movement, and where it builds and it builds, and then there's a big cymbal crash at one point in the entire thing. There's unpitched percussion. There's triangle and cymbal, in addition to the hybrids as semi-pitched percussion of the timpani, the low timpani. And that's the only time in the whole work where you hear unpitched percussion combined with maximal decibels, where sort of goes over that sort of that 80 decibel threshold. And it's thrilling, it's scary, exciting, all at the same time. But luckily that's just one moment, and then it goes back down into quiet. So if it stayed at that level, it would have been damaging to your hearing, But because it just touched it and went back, then it was not damaging. It was not sustained, but it could have been, and it was wonderful. It was thrilling. I mean, I was, hair raising, and I was crying, and all that big emotional response. But as a composer, I feel an ethical responsibility not to abuse that noise to pitch ratio. And that's really why hello, Amazing Serenity, welcome. And if you have any questions, just type them in the chat column and I'll respond to you live. So welcome, and welcome to anyone else who's listening. And so I was answering the question of why in these pieces, why, for example, there are no drums, there's no percussion, and so on, like why it's just these very spare sort of sine wave tones, And I was thinking about that in relation to my experience, which was just, now it's Sunday, and this was Friday night. Last night I listened to the live broadcast of the Vienna Philharmonic on our local classical radio station, WQXR. So I'm putting in, I guess, a plug here. If you go onto WQXR.org and you click under Carnegie Hall Live, they tend to archive these performances, and you can hear that. Not the Bruckner 7th, but you can hear, that was Friday night, you can hear the Saturday night concert, last night's concert, which was also wonderful, which I highly recommend as well, which had three pieces. There was a little dance piece by Stravinsky, it was sort of neoclassical arrangements of Tchaikovsky, and there was a nice curtain raiser, an Italian piece. But the big piece after the intermission was also a very big, expansive symphony, which was Schubert's Great C Major, Symphony Number 9 by Franz Schubert, great Austrian composer. Bruckner was also an Austrian composer, lived about 50 years after Schubert, in the next generation. But you can say that they were related in the sense that Schubert was expanding the time scale of the symphony. It was, again, very long, like about an hour long, and there were these very, very slow builds, a sense of music that gradually like started very quietly with one or two instruments, and then it gradually expanded and swelled, and became like a huge sort of ocean wave of sound, and then like gradually receded, and you experience this over an hour in a warm acoustic space, and it's just fantastic when there are live musicians. It's not amplified, you hear. I mean, for me, it was totally worth standing out in the cold on 57th Street in Midtown Manhattan with traffic going by, for 5 hours to do that, even though I'm, no spring chicken. I suggest you do that if you're in a city, if you're in any place where you can encounter live acoustic music in a warm acoustic space. When you've got serious musicians who take musicians seriously, and they're playing serious music, and by serious music I mean music where the composer, the songwriter, has really taken time to think about what she or he is doing, like the materials, like why am I using this chord, why am I using this sound, why am I using this rhythm, that's what I look for. It's sort of like like a jeweler or a watchmaker holds up every piece and says, oh, what's this and how can I use this, right? I like music that's constructed that way, like a fine Swiss watch, or like a fine piece of jewelry, where like every little thing has been examined and looked at, and the artist has tried to put it in the right spot, choose just the right sound, this sound, not that sound, this pitch, not that pitch, this rhythm, not that rhythm, and really where the artist has tried to hold himself to their highest ethical standards. I really think it's a matter of personal professionalism and ethics, because if you're not listening to music carefully, if you're just like shopping, if it's just on in the background, then if you're not really paying attention to it, then it doesn't really matter. It's just as long as it sounds okay, if it's not necessary. And that's if it's like hold telephone music, like you're waiting online or something like that, it just has to be sort of a basically sort of background pleasant sound, right? And that doesn't require as much of the creator. The creator doesn't have to hold himself to like that high ethical standard. But if you're asking people to like sit down and really focus their perception, and this is what we're all about here, is that we're all about developing our sense. Hi, Chris. Hi, welcome to Chris Kelly 871. And we're all about trying to develop our sense of listening without spacing out and without a crutch. So that's why there's just sound, and there's just a very simple representation of the oscilloscope, but there are no pictures, because I'm not giving you like a story or a hook. I'm not giving you words. I'm not giving you a dance beat. I'm not giving you something, I'm just giving you a structured flow of sound, which I've worked hard on, that has a certain sort of like ebb and a flow and a kind of a sense of movement, and towards a climax, and then a resolution. It's kind of as I said, kind of an exposition, a kind of a development, and a kind of a conclusion. And I've tried to remove the usual things that we rely on, which are like lyrics, dance beats, storylines, sort of traditional gestures, and without using sort of like a inherited like bass lines or chords or chord progressions that you've heard in other pieces, but to still express emotion, feeling, psychological state from that. And the idea is that we can then try to just stay with it in the present. And now in that present moment of listening, there's a lot, that we have memories of the past, because we have minds, we have the ability to remember, and we have the ability to predict. And so music is dealing with all of that in the present. In our present experience of listening, we are remembering what we've heard before, we're comparing what we've heard before to what we're hearing right now, and we're predicting what we're hearing right now based upon the past and the present, and we're projecting into the future. So we're creating in our minds a kind of a temporal structure of expectation, memory, and prediction, and we're comparing the flow of sounds in the present to what we remember and what we're going in the future. But in order for it to work, we have to stay in the present. Does that make sense? I hope that makes sense. I really believe this. I realize that this, if you're listening to this might just seem like so much just like word salad or crazy talk, but I'm really speaking to you from my heart. I'm really speaking to you just from like what I really believe. And I do hope that you appreciate it. I do hope that you feel inspired to make a like a goodwill offering. I really, I personally cannot listen to music I appreciate without contributing some money. I don't take money for free. If there's a real musician there, someone who has really worked his whole life. Hello, C's Bose. Good morning, good afternoon, wherever you are. Welcome. If you have any questions, please chat and I'll respond to your questions live. We've been discussing the experience of listening and what goes into a great experience of listening. I was talking about my experience not only of listening to this music right now, but of also listening to traditional Western classical music, specifically the Vienna Philharmonic at Carnegie Hall this weekend. And in fact, it's Sunday, as I speak, it's Sunday, March 2nd at almost noon New York time. And if you're in New York, you can go to Carnegie Hall. They're going to be performing at 2 p.m. Unfortunately, I can't make it because I have other work I have to do this afternoon because I'm finishing up this podcast. But if I weren't, and if I were anywhere near, if I were closer to Midtown, I would go over to Carnegie Hall on the box offices on West 57th Street between 6th and 7th Avenues. I'm around the corner on 7th Avenue. And it's your last chance to hear the Vienna Philharmonic recorded under the brilliant direction of maestro, great Italian maestro, living legend, Riccardo Muti, M-U-T-I. And today, as I said, Friday night when I went, the highlight was the Bruckner 7th Symphony, and it was amazing. And I was talking about the characteristics of the sound spectra, the sound decibels, the pitch noise ratios, the rhythms, the harmonies, all of that, the harmonic and melodic movement, the same issues and the same thrills and chills and spills last night with the Schubert Great C Major Symphony, the 9th Symphony in C Major. And today at 2 p.m. there'll be two of the greatest symphonies ever written on the program of the Vienna Philharmonic, which I regret will be missing because I'm doing this. The first is Mozart's last great symphony, his C major Jupiter Symphony, Symphony number 41 in C major, the Jupiter Symphony, and also the great last symphony by the great Czech composer Antonin Dvorak is From the New World, which he composed here in America, in New York, and was premiered at Carnegie Hall here in New York City about 100 years ago, more than 100 years ago. And it's like the first great American symphony. And these are both great masterpieces that have those same sense of swell of the movement, from like to that gradual movement to a climax and a resolution over a long period of time, that awesome experience of a swelling, surging, climactic sound that gradually unfolds and that you stay focused on in the present by careful present listening and listening in the present, which incorporates our memories of the past, but stays in the present. You have past memory, but you stay in the present. You don't live in the past, right? And it has a projection of the future, but you stay in the present. You don't pretend that you're living in the future. No one lives in the future, right? The future is just a hypothetical. And people who claim to be in touch with the future are, well, psychiatry would say that's a messiah complex, that's a form of self-delusion. And I would agree. I don't think anyone is living in the future. We're all living in the present. Yes. Welcome, Chris Kelly. Welcome. And welcome, Amarul. Welcome. And so if you're in New York this afternoon, head over to Carnegie Hall, try to get a ticket to hear the Vienna Philharmonic under Maestro Riccardo Muti performing the great final symphonies of Mozart, the Symphony Number 41 in C major, the Jupiter, known as the Jupiter, because when people heard it, it made them think of not only the great planet Jupiter, but the great god Jupiter, the Roman god Jupiter, and the who was the Roman version of the Greek Zeus, the father of the gods. I mean, people felt it was that like godly music, and Dvorak's Symphony from the New World, and again, the New World has two meanings here. The New World meaning North America and America from the European perspective, because he was a European and looking at America as a new world, but also creating a new world of symphonic expression, creating a new sound world, actually, in his symphony, which would be the American Symphony. The idea of using real American music, which is he used Black American music, folk music, so-called Negro spirituals, the Black American music of related to religious experience and the work experience, and he also invoked the traditional sacred music of Native American people in terms of rhythms, percussion, dancing, and used indigenous materials from North America, which he reinterpreted as a European because he was a person of Czech nationality, Antonin Dvorak, and using that to create a new world of sound, a new world of melody, harmony, expression, to create in what was then the new world acoustic of the brand new Carnegie Hall, to create a new experience. And we're trying to do that today. We're trying to create a new world of sound here by using some traditional techniques, but a new world of sound choices, in this case sinusoids, sine waves in sinusoidal envelopes, which are without any noise, so a zero noise to pitch ratio in a fairly low decibel range, and with a limited number of basic elements. As we discussed last time, we're keeping it down to about 10 elements at a time, 10 layers of sound. You could say 10 instruments or 10 notes interacting with each other. But in each piece, using a different set of instruments, pitches, basic sound spectra, distributions, and different rhythmic relationships to create a different emotional, psychological, spiritual expression. And that brings us back to what I was saying before, that if we do that and we stay focused in the present moment, then there is so much information in that we, as self-aware, self-conscious matter, are able to experience on a small level the infinite complexity, which is the totality of cosmic information, which for me is synonymous with what in theological language people call God. So without being on a messiah complex or without pretending to be a false prophet or anything like that, I say music is a revelation of God. And I think with that, if there are no more questions, or hello, Amarul, if there are no other questions or comments in the chat thing, I think I'll tie up this session for now. I'll see you soon. I'll probably log on again next week, Tuesday or Friday. Stay tuned here. Be in touch. Send me more comments on the TikTok, and let's grow this. Let's build a community of active listening that is meaningful and not just spacing out. That's actually helping us to deal with our emotions, our stresses, our real world problems. It's not just taking a break, it's actually doing something. Okay, so love you. See you next time. Okay, so I'd like to end it now, Luca. Can we? Okay, okay.